Thank you all for being here. I'm really excited to have you here. My name is Karen Howell Clark. I'm the Senior Director of Education Strategies here at United Way, and we're really thrilled to have you here for this discussion about closing the equity gap, the racial equity gap in education. This is something that is central to all of our work at United Way to ensure that students graduate, and we're really happy to have you here to listen to some information about it and talk with us about it and answer your questions. In a minute, I'm going to bring up Dr. Mann Danielson, who is our guest speaker, to start things off, and I'm going to let him tell you his story and how he got into this work. But I will say that he's someone who is, as the director of the Odessa Brown Children's Clinic, which is in the central area and has been serving children and families for many, many years, and is just a central part of the work in this community. He's doing work with kids and families every day. He also serves on many community boards, including our own board here at United Way of King County until recently. He was on our board for 6 years. He's also been an advisor for us on much of our education work. I actually met him, I don't know, he probably doesn't remember this, but well before I worked at United Way about 25 years ago, when a colleague and I from Washington Literacy went and got his advice about some literacy activities, family literacy activities, because he was doing some innovative work there at Odessa Brown, and we were really interested in that. So he is a real gift to our community in so many ways. He's also the kind of guy where you find a note, like I did the other day, in my papers on my desk, of which there are many, that's from January, that says, "How do you measure joy, Dr. Ben?" Because that was something that he'd said in a presentation I'd seen him give, and it just stuck with me, and it was something I wanted to write down and return to and think about over and over again. So with that, I will welcome Dr. Mann Danielson here. Thank you.
Good morning. That was a really kind introduction. I like that better than titles and accolades and things like that. So thank you. Now you make me want to also measure kindness. I'm really glad to be here today, and I want to be as brief as possible, and I wanted to set the tone a little bit, and then hopefully hear as much from you as possible. This is a space where there is a multitude of expertise in this room, isn't there? And there's a lot of lived experience as well as earned and gained experience in this topic, and a lot of interest, most importantly. So I was just hoping to set up the conversation a little bit, but not spend too much time up here. I would say really briefly, I have the best job in the world as a pediatrician, and working at the Odessa Brown Clinic forced me really, really early on to face some very important and humbling truths. Probably first and foremost that white coats do not confer upon you any greater sense of knowledge about what really matters to communities or about children's health than anybody else. That the idea of helping a young person travel through life towards success means that the interactions between health, wellness, and educational opportunity are so tightly intertwined that any attempt to separate them is a fool's errand. And third, maybe and more importantly, that the technical things that you learn to do in the spaces that give you the graces of letters after your name are absolutely unimportant compared to the social impacts, the social determinants, and the environmental experiences that we have around us. And with that, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the state of things for education in this state, in this county, with a little bit of data, reminding us all that data gives us a chance to infer, data implies, data shines a light, data that's accurate never lies, but data by itself never tells the whole story either. Is that right? So I wanted to just show a few slides and start with this one that just sets the tone for where our state is relative to the nation in terms of graduation. This should shock us. This should be one of those moments where you've probably seen this number before, and it should still bring a real pain into your gut, because this is a state with great resource, great opportunity. This is a county with incredible resource, judging from the number of towering cranes around us and the names and the people and the wealth that we have. And yet for us to exist in this place, 44th among all states, is a very powerful statement. The numbers change a little bit year on year, and the trends actually show improvement sometimes in different ways. But I wouldn't want a trend going towards improvement to be misinterpreted as some kind of great successes, because this is still where we are, 44th. You think about this and then you break it down by race and ethnicity, and you start to really understand that despite having an overall rate of around 80% graduation, when you break that down by race, you start to see some really wide gaps showing up in the data. Our state isn't unique in this particular way, but it is also striking that we have not done many things to narrow that gap in the past generation. Even as we see general trends towards improvement, the gaps actually stay pretty parallel. And that has to tell you something, right? About the deeply ingrained nature of what is a society that has been built up through racism and through socioeconomic disparity, and how the power of the dollar and the power of marginalization in this country is so powerful that you see it in real persisting numbers across the spectrum. I think about that and I want to step away from numbers and just recognize that we're actually talking about people and lives and experiences, and not just lives and experiences in this moment, but this whole trajectory, this whole journey, this whole sense of opportunity and possibility. When I get to go into the clinic every day, and especially if I spend time in that waiting room with kids of all nations and colors and languages and backgrounds, all you see is, I don't know, if you're a chemist, all you see is potential energy. All you see is this amazing sense of possibility. And if you sit and think about that for a moment, then anything that we do that gets to the numbers that we just saw means that we have constrained that potential, that we as a society have done nothing more than constrain potential, and that we have a deep obligation to look at that potential energy and make sure that turns into the most bright, powerful, kinetic energy you could possibly see. You could tell I did a little chemistry when I was younger. These lost futures, these lost opportunities are the things that we should dwell upon, and the things that we should think about when we start to understand how not only are we creating these disparities among different parts of our community, but we're harming ourselves from the future that we don't get to enjoy as a society because we've lost those opportunities among those individuals. Does that make sense? Or is that one of those pre-coffee kinds of statements that circles around? This is where I start to really feel the pain within these numbers as well, because the issues that lead to our graduation rates, our disparities, and our overall low rates nationally have their roots at the very beginnings in the spaces of preschools and early learning opportunities, but ultimately in the readiness of a child to enter school with all the gifts and tools and enthusiasms that they need to become bright and amazing, talented, thriving students. These numbers and the great gaps between these, both looking at it from a perspective of race and ethnicity and also from a socioeconomic perspective, are deep and powerful, and they set a pace, they set a rhythm, they set a tone that if you are going to overcome, if you are going to break the norm and succeed despite your socioeconomic status or the color of your skin, you will have to do something mighty indeed, because the forces are so set in those ruts. You can tell from these numbers so early on. What these also remind me is that as a pediatrician who works in a healthcare system that often waits too late until someone's sick in order to intervene, and doesn't give me as many opportunities as I wish I had to see potential and culture, nurture, cultivate it, and watch it grow, that we need to really be thinking about the roots, the upstream, the fundamental determinants, the things that matter in the lives of people that might not know numbers and data, but know exactly what it means for their child to either succeed or not succeed. Equity, a concept that most of us are trying to get deeper and deeper ensconced in really says to us that the solutions actually to many of the problems that beguile us the most are present in the voices and the experiences of those who are the most marginalized by these numbers. We have people with many different kinds of solutions. We have answers within the communities that are the most affected. And I hope we all think really carefully about how to be champions of those voices as well. These numbers are hard and they're difficult, and they are just numbers, but they do shine a light. They do infer. They don't lie. They don't tell the whole story either. And it's important for us to continue to deepen our understanding through both story and experiences and respect for the many voices that there are to speak to this issue. And I think with that, I would love to transition, hand it back to you, who I think when she showed up in our offices so many years ago actually came to give advice, not to take it from me, but this is the way really kind people talk about relationships. So I will hand it back to you, and thank you very much for giving me a few minutes to open this up.
Thanks. Thank you, Dr. Ben. Now I want to introduce Haydee Lavariega, who I'm lucky enough to have on my team working here at United Way. She's an educator and community organizer, and she's our impact manager working on our early learning work. And she's here to share information about United Way's work with you.
Good morning. How are you doing? I'm really happy to be here today and to talk a little bit more about what we are doing to undo and begin doing the work to undo the inequities that are taking place right now. So at United Way, we are starting early. And how that looks is through different programs. And I will talk more about a program called Parent-Child Plus in a minute. And I want to just tell you a little bit more about the communities that we're working with. We're working with communities, immigrant communities, communities of color, and we are taking a look at the disparities that we saw in the chart before, and we are figuring out how is that we can work together with communities to be able to reach the families and the families that are isolated. You saw that those disparities are pretty stark. And in order to solve those, we are working with communities that are usually underserved. A lot of those are immigrant and refugee communities. Because when children arrive to kindergarten, they are measured in 6 different areas in their first couple of weeks when they arrive. And that assessment continues to follow them to 3rd grade and then to high school. So during those first weeks, children are assessing things like social emotional learning. And in social emotional learning, they are assessing things like their self-regulation. So when they arrive and they start crying, how long will it take them until they self-regulate and they are ready to learn? Or for numeracy, it is not only to count really quickly from 1 to 10 or 1 to 100, but understand when you see a number 3, it's that printed number 3 when you see it, and also that is verbally in your language and also in English if you have more than one language. So that ability to understand way beyond has to start early, because when you get to kindergarten, and if you're not ready on those 6 different domains that we call in the state WAC kids, if you're not ready on those domains, then you're already starting behind. So what we're doing is reaching parents that have been isolated. A lot of the times there's a misconception that parents may not want to learn about what the children are doing in school. And what happens is, especially if parents are new parents into navigating the system, or immigrant parents who have just arrived, the school system here is different. So it's really important to reach those isolated parents. And the way that we do it is with a program called Parent-Child Plus. And Parent-Child Plus goes to the parents. We go to the houses of the children through 17 organizations. So we partner with 17 community organizations, and those communities have home visitors that share the same language and culture of the family, and especially with the parent. they share the same language, and they are able to understand everything about child development and everything they need to understand in order to be able to support together their child and be together as their first advocate and their best teacher. This really, really works because my first language is in Spanish, and I've had conversations with people in my community when we talk about certain words that are not really translatable, right? So we're able to understand concepts that are related to the educational system and be able to then support those families fully. So those visits happen for 2 full years. There are 92 visits, and those happen at the homes of the children. We are reaching children of ages 2 and 3, and we visit them twice per week. And one of those visits, the first visit, we have a book or a toy for the child. And then, so what we know when we're talking earlier about one of those fundamental things that we have to support is the parent-child relationship. So in those visits, we know that the most important thing is not anybody coming from outside the community to show the parents, but what we are doing is fostering that relationship so that the parent will continue to do that for other children in the family as well. And so I went to a home visit, and I visited the family of Aaliyah. And in this case, the grandma was the caregiver because we work with these programs with whoever is at home. The grandma was taking care of 2 children, a baby and Aaliyah. When we arrived, and one of the reasons I should share that grandma is doing this, she had to figure out when to find a time to work so the other parents could work as well, right? So in this case, we showed up. Aaliyah was very, very excited that the home visitor was there. She opened the door, and this was the second visit. So she had already figured out all her puzzles. She had a big puzzle with a bus, and so we showed up. She got her books out, laid it out, and was so ready to show us what she already knew how to do. And then she used that concept, the home visitor, of the puzzle to then put sounds together as a puzzle, right? And so that's the beginning of reading and writing, and it's so important for kindergarten readiness. So we are continuing to foster the cultural relevancy of the program, and that is something really important that, as you know, school systems are trying really hard to do right now. So we're really successful at the culturally relevancy teaching and learning part through Parent-Child Plus. Right now, we are reaching 1,300 families across King County. We are working with families all the way from up north, close to the Snoqualmie area, to families in Kent, Burien, Renton. So we're working with families to be able to reach them where they are. And we know that this works, also not only because we see it in the faces of children that we work with, but also because there have been studies that show how successful Parent-Child Plus is. And in the state of Washington, OSPI, the Office of Public Instruction, had a study last year, actually, that was proven around the 6 areas of readiness for kindergarten, how those are very, very linked to the areas of, to meet 3rd grade standards. So when children are ready or arrive ready for kindergarten, and they are ready in most of the 6 areas of readiness, of kindergarten readiness, then they're very likely to do well in the 3rd grade. That is the first time that the state of Washington has an assessment. And we know also that if children do well in that 3rd grade assessment, then they will do well in high school and they will graduate high school. So when we talk about how are we addressing inequities, one of the things that we can continue to do is making sure that we are working with families. We're working with families of color. We're learning from them. We're working with them and being able to put these programs together. So in the Parent-Child Plus program, as you can see here, it also has this consistency of arriving ready to kindergarten to be able to graduate from high school. And going back to the cultural relevancy and the importance of the program, we have been analyzing data, and we have learned that when we support community-based organizations of color, these are organizations that are led by their own communities, so their leadership, the board, the staff, and the home visitors as well, are of the same culture, share the same language. Those organizations are very successful at continuing to have families and continue to support those families and have the children ready for school and for life. So we had an assessment around the youth of color and found this culturally relevant part. And a lot of that has also to do with cultural identity, right? And catching it early. It is so important to start doing this work early. And I'm really excited also to share about another program when we're doing this as well. This is a program that we call Reconnecting Youth. And Reconnecting Youth is also really successful because we're able to, again, reach the youth where they are. And I know from my experience in my family, and I know from the experience in community, that it is really hard to support a youth when the parent may not have graduated from high school before, or when a new parent has arrived and doesn't know well the system. It is hard to know how many credits do you need, how many electives do you need, and especially if there are other things in the family that are not supporting the youth, or in terms of understanding how the system works, or other disparities that may show. So the Reconnecting Youth program is supporting youth outside of the school system to get reconnected back to school. And sometimes school doesn't look exactly like going back to a high school. We have stories like the story of Habib, who came from Botswana and then came at age 18 and had to be placed back 2 grades before to 10th grade. And he was ready to graduate and spend classroom time with peers of his age. So he found CareerLink, and through CareerLink, he was able to have a program where he could earn his high school diploma and at the same time also earn 20 credits in a community college that were getting him on his way to his AA and for a 4-year college degree. So we also have stories like Marite, who also went back and started going to high school, continued to go, but realized that they didn't have the credits to graduate on time. And so was able to connect with one of the programs that United Way supports as CareerLink, like I mentioned, and was able to then graduate with a high school credential. Last year, we have been able to support 470 youth of color to get their high school credential, and as well as over 2,300 students who have been able to get their high school credential. So this is one of the really programs that we're excited about. We are working really hard at being able to talk with communities, to learn from communities, to continue to follow their leadership and work together in finding ways to support children and youth and families in order to be able to undo these inequities. Thank you.
Thank you, Haydee. And you want to stay up here because we want to hear what's on your mind and what questions you have. I also want to introduce Ruel Olande Jr., also on my team. He's the impact manager working with our older youth programs, including Reconnecting Youth. And we'd love to hear what you're thinking about and wondering about. What questions do you have? I don't need this.
Bob Hamilton, National Paper. Do you have a number for the cost per service provider, United Way person for the Parent Child Plus and the Reconnecting Youth? How much money that takes per visit, or per something?
Per something. We can give you per something. So with the Parent Child Plus program, the cost for the full 2 years of the program is usually somewhere around $14,000 to $16,000, and that covers all of the staff time over those 2 years. It covers the transportation time and costs, as well as the curriculum, the books and toys that go out to kids. And it varies somewhat by agency, so some of them they have different costs depending on where they are and what their structures are. With Reconnecting Youth, it's, there are a number of different kinds of programs. Haydee talked about some where you can get a high school credential and college credit at the same time. There are some that are focused just on a GED. So they vary somewhat too. I will say that the basic education allocation that those programs can draw down from the state through this open doors legislation is somewhere around $8,000 a year per student. It costs a bit more than that, so I would say that if you're looking at a student cost, it's probably somewhere around $8,000 to $10,000 a student.
And to contextualize that, the cost of not investing in a child is probably worth just keeping in mind as well, which I think United Way has done a lot to help to understand the long-term opportunity costs there, which is, of course, dwarfs those numbers.
Great, excellent. Important point. What else? Yeah.
I'm Christopher Wiggins with the Liberty Mutual Foundation. Looking at Prepare Child Plus and the youth ready for kindergarten for the study, about 45%, which is 50% more than the peer group. Still less than half. Has the United Way or others thought about what are the other factors that may be preventing that other 55%, and if that's something that could be addressed in the program, maybe expanding it, or what other sort of factors and influences might be continuing to present a barrier?
I'll just start and then see what you guys have to add. I think.
Could we repeat the question?
Oh, thank you. We're supposed to be repeating the question. So I think you're asking, what about, so great that we're helping, that the kids in Parent Child Plus are doing better, but it's only, it's still comparatively low in terms of the numbers of students that we want to be ready when they arrive at kindergarten and succeeding in third grade. You're absolutely right. We're not satisfied with that. And our goal is to have them be better prepared than kids in like situations around the state. And so we're really happy that we're succeeding at that in all of the ways, and we're not satisfied. You guys have other thoughts about other issues that are contributing to them not achieving?
I think this does get back to this concept of social determinants of well-being in so many levels. And I will shout out to the United Way, because if you look at the host of programs that they do, there is this sort of multi-layered and multi-valence kind of approach to really helping to solve some of those at the real basic level, like, let me help you just do your taxes and take that stress off your shoulders, up to the deeper investment levels that pan into areas that are the rest of the areas that affect life. But this is a message to me that this is a team effort. This is a societal effort to change a course, and we can do very promising programs that are absolutely essential and proven and are making dramatic differences. It's not lost on me that is an incredible bend in a curve there that's remarkable. And we have to each be finding ways to invest in communities that get down to the basic needs, that understand how to reinforce and support families and family structures, how to really go even deeper into the culturally enriching and empowering and strengthening approaches to services, and just understand our interconnectedness. Wherever you're working, you're doing something that has something to do with why that's 45% and not 95%.
And I think I'll add that we really have to go back and look at the historical evidence of why children of color especially, and the specific groups of children in kindergarten readiness. The first time I took a look at the numbers, that was my first question: why? And how can we solve this? And I think definitely all of us, we have to work together. And a part of this is, how do communities and schools work closer together, especially for kindergarten readiness, but all across the system. And that's something really hard to do. That's something that schools are working to try to figure out how to do. Communities are knocking and parents are knocking at the door. They want to get together, they want to learn. And school systems also want parent involvement, but usually the needs of each and the capacity of schools and teachers and administrators it's a lot, right? So I think like the first thing would be Native children are one of the groups of children that are the farthest from kindergarten readiness, and that has a lot to do with the history of this country, right? And how we are addressing those. How are we working directly with the communities and parents to be able to do this work? And as funders, I think there's a huge responsibility in able to work with smaller community organizations who are carrying that work and are usually underfunded. So that is something that we're definitely as a funding agency as well looking at, and how do we figure that part out.
And I'll say too, we've been doing Parent-Child Plus for 10 years or more, and we were lightly involved before that. And we have changed. I mean, it's a national model, it's evidence-based, so we're operating with fidelity to the model, but we also have done some different things depending on what's going on out there. I mean, with a lot of the immigration challenges that people in the community are facing, many of the people that we're serving, families that we're serving, we did a lot over the past few years to have, know your rights trainings for the staff that are working in the program so that they can share that with the families, to think about different ways of reaching out and working with families if there are places they're frightened to go, or, other connections that we have to make. So that's just one example. So it does change.
And I'll add one thing that I forgot to mention before. That was in my slides. We are also doing a family childcare program. So we know that some children are going to be at a family childcare and won't be at home. So we're figuring out how to reach the other children. And so in this case, we are working with the provider of a home-based family childcare. And then we know that provider will continue to have that same teaching to the future kids that will go into that family childcare. So that's another way that we are reaching children as well.
And is that with the same tenets of Parent-Child Plus? So you bring those same learnings into family childcare?
Thank you so much for the question. Yes. So we do the visits to the provider. We provide also toys to have collaborative learning, and books for the children as well. So we're using everything that we're learning from the program in the home visiting part and taking it to the home family childcare. Thank you.
I had a question, because it was on your last slide, Parent-Child Plus, or your dad there about, that'd be great, Karen, if you can refer to it. It was regarding the culturally, I think it was in the Parent-Child Plus. Yeah, right there.
Okay.
Yeah. So community of color-based organizations. Can you speak? I was trying to interpret that. I first thought it referred to the culturally appropriate teacher, but it's more than that, I think, right? Can you give examples?
Ruel, do you want to enter that one, Ruel, about our community of color-based?
Your question is, I'm going to try to reframe it, is speaking to how this data reflects to the broader sense of how we are providing culturally relevant services. Is that correct?
I just have two questions. That, what does it look like? What are examples of that? And then how important is that through a child's life cycle? Is it equally important throughout, or what? How does it play throughout one's development?
Yeah. So first and foremost, what does that look like? So that looks like, as Haydee was mentioning, organizations are reflective of the community that they're serving. So the board, the staff, the service providers, the people visiting homes, or the people connecting with young people are oftentimes reflective of those same populations. What that means for young people is that they're continually seeing themselves reflected inside the people who are providing them those learning opportunities, and gives them that exponentially added benefit of being able to be their true selves, so that they can access resources that are, or learn things that are more reflective of their own personal home culture and identity. A great phrase that one of our organizations uses, which is called Lavariega Empowerment Mentoring, often uses this phrase is, to be me, I have to see. And that is so powerful when oftentimes working with young people or students who are oftentimes inside educational systems that are often majority white-centric, and you have like young Black and brown children trying to look for mentors and leaders that are reflective of them. Does that answer your question?
It does, yeah. So I infer from what you say that that's important even as children aged in?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was just at a meeting with the University of Washington. We were just talking about this very issue about there can actually be good supports where you have a sense of connectedness, and let's just call it belonging as a deeper sense, and then enter college, say, and not have that. And it really has a devastating effect on attrition rates and graduation rates at that level too. So your point, which you were implying, which is beautiful, that this is important throughout the lifespan, and especially maybe throughout the development of the educational system up through young adulthood.
I'll add to that the social emotional part of that in terms of self-identity. So when a child from the start understands his culture and where society will place him later in life, it's really important to have a strong self-identity and understanding your culture before facing puberty, when you will be confused about so many things, to try to belong to mainstream society. And when you realize that you don't belong or you will not be accepted by your peers, then it's a harder thing to do than if we start working with it earlier. And then there's the self-identity. And this truly, there's a huge body of research around how much this supports the success, academic success, but also life success.
I'll add that it's important in adulthood too, right? In our workplaces, we want to see ourselves reflected, and everywhere we go.
To that point, there's a recent study that came out, academic study, that uses the phrase cultural safety and identity safety, and it tightly correlates success in school and graduation rates to a sense of safety in being who students actually are. And so, and it's difficult to actually put a quantitative number on the amount of impact that has on later school success, but the researcher concluded that it is a significant indicator on whether or not a student will be successful in school. If they have that sense of identity safety, then they can bring that to bear to their academics, to their social emotional, and those things kind of come together to lead to higher levels of academic success.
So perhaps this is an example of a program that you're focusing on in the early years, but has components that should be probably incorporated into other programs that would extend throughout.
Well, they have more impact in the later years than the earlier years, but the combination of doing good work in the early years to allow kids to be successful in the later years, and then building the cultural identity and identity safety in some of the later interventions, those two things combine to lead to much higher levels of academic success.
Right. I'll also add that the Parent-Child Plus program is about working with parents and kids together, and it is instilling knowledge and skills and confidence in those parents so that they act as their kids, we say first and most important teachers, but also their educational advocates throughout their educational trajectory. And that's part of it too. So getting parents to understand the self-identity issues that we're talking about, the racism that's in school districts, et cetera, is a whole different thing and is important as well, so that they can support their children through that.
Just to add to everything else everyone said, to that, what socialization practices are also in tandem with this? I heard about know your rights activities, things of that sort, but that's really important to growth mindset and moving self-directed. They can do this on their own outside of being helped.
So you're asking what socialization practices come along with as part of the program?
A model or a framework you're using when you're working with youth or the families.
I think if you want to say something.
I'll speak around the work that I do with young people. We have an initiative right now called Positive Cultural Identity, which in its very essence is addressing some of building that cultural relevancy inside young people, and working with particularly racial and ethnic-based organizations in the community that oftentimes use whatever that specific community's mechanism for self-reflection and understanding of social justice and history play a role in that child's own personal history, which oftentimes helps build an understanding of why the world is the way the world is for that young particular person, and then giving them the tools necessary for educational navigation, self-advocacy, voice, that lets them kind of activate that mechanism internally that they already have, so that it lets them project them towards whatever version of success they're trying to shoot for.
Yeah, and in early learning, I'll share that we have a big focus on Parent-Child Plus, and we also are working in other areas to support those same things around cultural identity with other organizations. And something that we know is that parents usually want to come together and want to build together and be able to learn from the lived experiences and learn from each other in order to be able to continue supporting their children and their families and their communities. So that is part of the work that we have also done with organizations that come together with parents. And something else that I'll add to this slide that is not written here, but that we've learned is that all children benefit from this. So for communities of color that have children, so there's the comparison between mainstream and community of color organizations, right? So for community of color organizations, white children are also benefiting from this. So it is at the same rate. So it is important to share the part of how much in terms of investments, as you were speaking before, how important it is to trust and work with communities, organizations of color.
Are there any ideas that are surfacing from impacted communities that you feel United Way could help launch, but you haven't taken that step yet?
Any ideas? Any ideas that we're hearing from communities that we haven't been able to launch yet, but might be able to help with? Where to start?
Yeah.
What do you guys?
I think we hear a lot. There's a lot of need in different areas, right? I think speaking the education part in early learning is definitely the parent support and leadership of parents. That is something that it's hard to come across as a community organization, and so parents are ready to learn, they want to engage, and sometimes it's hard to do with the scheduling, and so there are communities that know how to do that very well. And also, we hear a lot around immigration right now, of course, and organizations that have been working with immigrant populations are right now overwhelmed with all of the needs, and there's trust in the community there, and so just that the support that organizations are providing. So that would be, but there's a lot of intersections of the education work with the different aspects. And I know that as United Way, we're addressing some of those, but there's definitely need.
I'll add on to that there's a lot of opportunities that we can focus on and a lot of feedback that we get from the partners that we work with. The one common theme that we continually hear is that our work in the community is addressing historically institutionalized issues that are happening, and that there isn't enough to really dive deep and address the core of the issue. And so we're getting feedback of trying to figure out how to expand depth and breadth of our work. Our agencies often ask us, there are other partners who are doing similar work and they're wanting to collaborate to address wider issues with that particular problem. And we're, as much as we can, trying to think of creative solutions that allow that collaboration and that deep dive. But an expansion of the work of existing work is oftentimes both and, right? New work, but expansion of existing things.
Can I add one thing that isn't United Way, but you reminded me of is in our parenting work, we're starting to hear more about this idea of joy, actually, in a way that the circumstances of life, and sometimes the generational circumstances of life, cut out opportunities for play with young people as parents. And playing with a young child is both innate and learned. And that it's not an automatic that having a child means you automatically know exactly what play with a young child looks like on a developmental scale and in other ways. And this desire to sort of create the space and the relearning of playing with the child is part of that developmental encouragement is really something that seems to be coming up from the voices of a lot of families. It's not an automatic that if you were not played with as a child yourself and then grew up to be a parent, you might need support in creating the space and the wherewithal to play with your child.
That's a great example, and it is connected to United Way because in Parent Child Plus, I mean, that's exactly what we're encouraging is for the parents to play and talk with their children. Every week, we bring either a book or a toy, an educational toy that the family gets to keep. And it's about that interaction and that joy and playing. As Roel said, it's important to go deeper on some things that we're doing as well. And so I also want to call out the family childcare model of Parent Child Plus, which is something that we've really just started doing. And so there's a lot of room there for growth and expansion. We expanded this year to be serving 25 family childcares across King County instead of the 12 that we were serving last year. But that's a tiny, tiny drop in the bucket in terms of how many are out there and how many families we could reach. And that is something that came to us from community where we were hearing like, we're not able to reach from the programs that we're working with. We're reaching these 1,300 families every year, but there are also others who can't make the time in their schedules for these 2 visits a week. And they're in a family childcare in my neighborhood. Can we serve them there? And also just hearing about the educational and professional development needs of those family childcare providers. So it is.
So if you're going to the family childcare centers, how do the parents learn how to play with the kids? Is it then on the
part of the model is connecting with the parents. So you want to talk about that, Haydee?
Yes, and so we are hearing from, especially from the expansion right now, in the plans of community organizations partnering with the providers and being able to put events together where parents and children and the provider are in the same space. And the other part of that is being able to connect with other parents that, like you're dropping your child off and leaving. And so childcare last year for the barbecue and another childcare for another organization, they went to the zoo together. So there have been those opportunities to have the learning and also passing along. We are with family childcares for 2 years right now. In the second year right now, it is being built more around how to communicate with parents and being able to share what their children are doing and also to be able to connect with them.
And the books and toys that are given to the sites for them to use there are also books that go home with the kids that the families get to keep, along with some information. So great point. Yeah.
I'm just curious what the transition out of the Parent Child Plus program looks like. It sounds like you do a lot of work, really do work with families, and you develop really strong relationships with them, and then once the child ages out, where do those families go next?
Yes.
Great. Where do kids from Parent Child Plus go next? What's the transition plan?
So organizations work really hard to understand the landscape of where the next step is, because this is a step before pre-K or 1 year before going to kindergarten. So they refer and support the children into the transition to ECAP or Head Start in order for them to be able to get there, or sometimes they have to be in the wait list and then support them and advocate for them to get into a pre-K before arriving to kindergarten. Highland Public Schools right now is working to have to start earlier the transition to K. So they're working to start in January. So we are starting to talk with them also to connect the organizations and be able to support the children who finished and then have time to be ready for kindergarten. Yes, so organizations do an amazing job in being able to connect and understand how and where are the pre-K possibilities for children.
And it's built into the model in the last part of the second year. And this has been in the model since it was developed in 1965. This is, that transition is absolutely part of what happens. It's intentionally built for children who are 2 to 4 to be a preschool program.
Do you have a deeper reflection about that?
I think my concern is that, families are probably coming to rely on you as a point of contact for other background services. And if they suddenly lose that connection, and sure, you can refer them to other pre-K programs, but they might not have that same resource available. And I don't know if you ever have families coming back and asking for, rights and all these other associated services.
Yeah, or do the families have other needs that continue then after that, and do programs keep in touch? Part of the programs, the way that we select the programs who are delivering this, so we have, as Haydee said, 17 partners who are actually hiring the home visitors and working with families. And part of the way we select them is that they have other resources, and once families are connected to that organization, so whether it's a Children's Home Society, a Congolese Integration Network, they have other resources and feel a connection to that organization in an ongoing way.
Okay, so there's something, that relationship continues.
That relationship continues, yeah. I mean, it's not necessarily a formal one, although it often is.
Yeah, and I think it's very relationship based, right? So the organization usually has other things going on for supports, for older children, for youth, for parents, and so it's the start of a relationship of families learning of how that works. Yeah, and then families then know, okay, this is an organization, I know what they offer, and if they have any other things going on, they have flyers that they share so that they know of things in there or in the community. Mm-hmm.
Stefan?
So I'm Stefan Blanford. I serve on the United Way board, and I used to be a school board director for Seattle Public Schools. And to that point, which I think is a really key point about working in early learning and then what happens when kids get to the K-12 system. And I know a little bit about both Seattle and Highline because my wife works in Highline Public Schools, and obviously as a school board director, I spent a lot of time in this space. And for United Way of King County, one of the things that we talk about when we're making investments, we spend a lot of time talking about leverage, like making an investment that pushes other either funders or systems to engage in a different way. And what I have seen in my years in education is that the work that's being done in pre-K is really forcing public institutions to interact differently. And an example that I can think of is now I know that preschool teachers spend a lot of time with kindergarten and first grade teachers figuring out what strategies they need, what they're seeing in the community, what the kids are coming with, and how their practices need to change. And 10 years ago, 15 years ago, there was total separation between what happened in early learning and what happened in K through 12. And so when I think of leverage, when I think of an early investment, changing systems and making a much larger investment over time, I think that's a really key example of the type of investment, particularly in early learning, that is paying huge benefits over time, and something that we have made a wise investment in and should continue to support. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
To that end, I'm curious, who is facilitating that interaction? Is it the Department of Early Learning for the city that's helping those people come together and funding that time?
In many cases, it is the Department of Early Learning for Seattle. We don't have comparison groups in other cities. But in Seattle, that is the case. And because Seattle's model now is nationally recognized, its early learning system is nationally recognized, a evaluation came out and said it's the model that all other cities should be emulating, with the exception of the fact that we're not serving enough kids, right? That's a really clear example of where that, early investments are starting to reap pretty significant dividends for the community at large.
So that was actually my question a little bit earlier in terms of, you were talking about transitions from this Parent-Child Plus program into the pre-K and the K, but it's my understanding there's like still 80% of kids that are not being served by ECAP or Head Start.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty big chunk of kids that don't have something to bridge that gap. Is the city's, the Families and Education levies, are they starting to fill that gap further?
I don't want to steal your
It's all related.
Yeah, so way back in my career, I was the executive director of the White Center Early Learning Initiative, and the idea was that we were going to make sure in White Center that every kid was ready for kindergarten by the time they arrived there. And what we discovered is that in low-income communities, but in wealthy communities as well, there is some percentage of parents who don't want to take their children and put them in center-based care. Either they can't afford it or they prefer to have their kids at home. And so it's more difficult to engage with those parents. What this program is doing is figuring out ways, particularly culturally competent ways, to engage with those parents and bring them in and provide the type of training and support so that they can be advocates and the first and best teachers of their children. But you are surfacing what is a significant issue, which is there are lots of parents who need support in order to work with their kids, and it's difficult to get those parents and bring them into these systems. And it's ongoing work that no one has totally figured out yet, but we're working really hard to try to.
And it is also true that there is a number of children also that there's not enough, in the state of Washington, enough ECAP or Head Start spots for all of the children that need to get ready through either ECAP or Head Start.
We do have connections to the city of Seattle and King County, particularly in this program. We have them in lots of ways, but because we are braiding funding from both of those sources, so we've gotten them excited enough about the program to invest in significant ways, both from the City of Seattle Department of Education and Early Learning and from King County's Best Starts for Kids initiative, and we are managing that so that it works seamlessly for the providers, and they only have one contract and one application. All of that, those interactions are really centralized, and that does give us kind of a leg up in getting some spots in Seattle preschool program, in knowing about more connections with ECAP and Head Start, and it doesn't solve the problem, and it doesn't solve the problem for other kids.
I think we have two questions. Okay, yes.
So, you said Parent-Child currently is only hitting a small percentage of the potential families that could benefit. Is United Way of King County hoping to increase the scale of the program that you're funding, or are you hoping to hand it off to the cities? Or
So I want to be clear that I was talking about the family childcare model when I said there's so much untapped opportunity and need out there. With the core model, the home visiting model that we've been doing for a number of years, we worked really hard to move from serving 160 families a year to this 1,300 families a year, and we feel good about that. Are we hitting every child and family in every corner of the county and every population? No. And so we're always thinking about that. Who are we missing? And we feel pretty confident that we're reaching the bulk of the families that would qualify for this program. Remember, a child has to come in at age 2, 16 to 30 months. The family has to be not connected to other early childhood resources and be more isolated, and they have to be available for the 2 visits a week. And so I think we're feeling pretty good about the size of the program there. Now there are always, additional costs, things change, things become, as minimum wage goes up and things like that, we want to make sure we're supporting the staff who work in these programs in the way that we should be. So you'll see our costs go up. But the big gap that we're seeing is in the family childcare in terms of need. And we are hoping to scale that up even further than we have.
Got it. And so this is more than a pilot. Like United Way of King County is really trying to cover all of King County, grow it on both the individual families as well as through the family child care providers to cover the full county for the communities of color in King County versus handing it off.
Right. And I think, so going back in history, when we had first had the growth, as I said, from 160 families a year to 1,200 at the time families a year, we thought that was going to be it. We're going to take this program, grow it to scale, and then hand it off, find some public funding source that will sustain it. What happened was that those public funding sources said, oh yeah, we're in. So City of Seattle is investing $1 million a year in this. King County Best Starts for Kids, $3 million a year in this. So this is significant and meaningful. They said, we're in, but only if you're still in and raising private dollars. So we have to continue to raise millions of private dollars each year to manage. But they said only if you're raising dollars and if you're managing it, because we want you to take on the braiding of this funding and that work. So it's not quite the handoff that we had in mind, and yet we're really thrilled that we've been able to attract that public investment, which we do feel like is, sustainable.
Thank you.
Do you have a sense of how many families are not being served as a result of not being able to carve out 2 visits a week, which is kind of a lot, considering that many of those families, everybody has to be on deck for work, as much as they can. And then, is there a strategy to deliver the services differently in order to pick up more of those?
Yeah, so is there a strategy to deliver services differently to pick up additional families that can't make those 2 visits a week? Yes, the family childcare strategy is designed specifically to reach that gap, those families that we're not reaching. And this program and model was designed to reach families that are not connected to other early learning programs. So we aren't, I should say that the staff is very flexible in terms of the times when they can go and visit families, and it still doesn't work for all families necessarily.
You answered part of this, but so it sounds like for the Parent Child Plus program, you feel like you're reaching 80+% of the eligible families for that program, maybe 90, but
I would say, yep.
Yeah, 80-20 rule, you're there. What about for the reconnecting youth? You served, you said 2,333 youth. Is that, what's that look like in terms of what we could have served if we had a huge amount of funding? And by the way, folks, Washington is 10th in the GDP rank, and we're 44th in that's just embarrassing. That's terrible. Anyway, so, just a reality check, like, yeah, we've got the cash.
Yeah.
It's somewhere.
We do the cash. So what's the number we're not reaching with Reconnecting Youth? That's a little bit harder to answer because we don't know. So we do have a number that we put out there. I think it was on one of our slides that the data tells us that there are about 14,000 youth who are not connected to school or work and haven't graduated from high school in our community. And so, we're not reaching all of them, but we're reaching so many more. When we started Reconnecting Youth, there were probably about 3, there were 3 re-engagement programs in King County that worked with students to help them get GED or a high school credential. And now there are 16 through all of these investments and this system that we've helped build. So I think we're on the path to serving those, but there are thousands of youth who are not, for many reasons. Why is that? Because they're not interested, they don't have the time, they think they've gotten a job that they think is going to sustain them and doesn't require getting a high school credential. The programs aren't responsive to what they need.
Mike from Neighborhood House, what age does Reconnect Youth
I believe any high school age of a young person who's disconnected from high school, so as young as 13 from my understanding.
That's really great because one of the gaps that we see is especially those really tweens and early teens. Parents start to get concerned about seeing problem behavior, and there's not a lot of programs unless you're already involved in the criminal justice system or you have some diagnosis. Most programs won't serve you. So really low barrier entry programs and serving that younger age is really important to get kids before they really start falling through the cracks.
And then on the opposite end, what age not take?
21.
And it all depends on which program you're at. So there are a bunch of different streams of funding. United Way got into this space because of open doors funding that we referred to before. That was legislation that said, hey, we're going to apply that same amount, basic education allocation that we give to students in the K-12 system in a classroom. We're going to apply, it's not the same amount, but a percentage of that amount and have that money essentially follow a student who has left school, has had their education interrupted before graduating from high school. And when that came out and we saw that there weren't programs taking advantage of it, that there weren't enough programs out there, and that they didn't necessarily know about this funding stream and weren't using it weren't drawing down the funds, that's where we stepped in and said, let's have this big initiative to build up the number of these programs, to help them work together in a system, collect data, and to really provide many more options for students in their communities. And some of that, so a lot of that funding comes from that open doors legislation, but some of it comes from other kinds of programs that may serve kids up to 24 sometimes. Some can only start at 16. It varies a bit, but there's a good range, and your points are good about the importance of that and importance of going young.
You have great questions, and thank you for the questions that you have. And something that I will add to your point earlier around other ideas and other things. So we are also doing other great things in working with youth and working with early learners and organizations around very similar areas, but that are focusing on specific and different groups. So there's that, and there's, if you would love to learn more, I would love to sit down with you and share more. If you have any other questions, of course, reach out, and we'll be happy to, whoever the person is that you connect with, or Jared's information is here as well, but we're very happy to sit down and talk to you more and about any other questions that you have around our other investment areas or about Parent-Child Plus. Really happy to talk about it. We love this stuff. We love the work that we're doing, and so we're excited to talk about it anytime.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we're really happy that you're here and that you're involved and engaged with us, because we couldn't do it without you. So we're really happy. So I want to thank Dr. Mann Danielson for being here today to talk with us, Haydee Lavariega, Ruel Lalande Jr. on staff here at United Way. And I want to encourage you, when you leave, if you want to make a comment on social media about what you learned today or what you're thinking about, we now have this big Seattle heart on the corner of Columbia and 2nd, and we'd love to have you go down there and with hashtag Seattle Heart, take a photo and talk about your experience. Thank you so much for coming.